Hello, my name is Julie Hall, and I'm here to speak with you about veterans that were deployed. We particularly are doing a segment on Vietnam veterans, but I think one of the things that we've learned in our experience is that all veterans have common experiences they share. So one of the things we are doing here is hoping to educate the public on what veterans go through. I want to thank the Norton Media Center for allowing us the time to do this. I think it's very important. And I have a very, very special guest with me today. His name is Stephen Manchester, and he's going to tell us about himself and his experience in the military to start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so I served in the first Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm, and my experience started a little bit differently. So I was in the National Guard. I actually worked for the Massachusetts Department of Correction at the time, so I was a correction officer. I was also a military police, E5, which is a sergeant, squad leader. And not Christmas Eve, but Christmas night, 1990, we were activated, and I got a call from my platoon sergeant. So I figured he had had a little bit too much eggnog, you know. But lo and behold, we ended up getting activated. We were trained for like 3 or 4 weeks up in Devons. I tell people on 3 inches of ice, which makes good sense if you're training for desert warfare, and we get sent. And the good news was most of the people that I served with had occupations within law enforcement, so we either worked in the prisons or out on the streets as police officers. But it was a very sobering experience to get over there, and you know, as everybody knows, I mean, it was a 100-hour war, but they had bombed, you know, without interruption for 41 days. What they call softening the enemy. And our job, I ended up landing in Saudi Arabia, and we sat in one of the log bases just really getting ready to go through the breach between Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Saddam Hussein swore it would take the Americans 6 months to get through the breach. It took us 17 minutes, thanks to good old-fashioned American ingenuity. And my job as an MP was primarily to collect EPWs, or enemy prisoners of war. We patrol main supply routes, provided armed escorts for convoys, things of that nature. But 23 years old, I was actually considered one of the older people there, right? So, you know, the kids that are 17, 18 years old, I think the difficulty with experiences like that is it becomes who they are, right? Where for me, it was more about something that I experienced. And there were some really, really difficult things that happened over there. And, you know, it takes you a while to come back from something like that. Only spent about 6 months in the desert. Felt about 6 years. And if I'm being honest, it took me about 5 years to really come back, mentally, spiritually, I mean, you name it. I got back into the prison system, which was really difficult for me because in order to be good at your job, you know, you have to be aggressive, which I had no problem with. But it was difficult to heal from Desert Storm, you know, when I came back and got back into the prison system. So, yeah.
So what kinds of things did you, and I know you talked about the, you know, experience with the prisoners, and you know, we're really trying to give folks here an insight into that.
Right.
You know, what's that like between them and you when that happens?
Well, I think it's very clear. I mean, it's a very clear game, right? So I'm wearing a certain uniform, they were wearing a certain uniform. If we're both armed, right, then you engage. I mean, that's just the way it goes. With prisoners, once they're disarmed, I think it's a difficult situation because I really don't understand their culture. A lot of what they do over there is religious-based. We have a certain value on life, which is significantly different from there. And that's what was kind of eye-opening for me. When I got there, I mean, there were kids that were fighting that were 14, 15 years old. And then when you really looked at them or tried to analyze what was going on, you realize they had a lot more combat experience than I did, right? I mean, they were fighting for, you know, for generations over there. So tough for me. I mean, it's, you know, I'm a humanist, so my job was very clear. I did my job very well, but I didn't think that my job was to abuse people or you know, take liberties with other people's lives. And the people that I serve with serve very honorably as well. But it really depends on you know, the orders that you receive. We carry everything out. We're trained basically at a 3rd grade level, and it's repetition, repetition. And the people that we serve with, you're basically in lockstep. And the way things happen, you know, I know exactly the person to my left, how they're going to react, or the person to my right, and they know how I'm going to react, right? But when you start to, you know, when you're in the moment, I tell people, I've never backed down from a fight because the fight is almost the easy part, if I'm being honest with you. It's the stuff afterwards, right? It's that all of a sudden I'm smoking a cigarette, my hand's shaking, and I start to realize, this could have went a different way, or what would have happened, and you start to try to reconcile that. At a bigger level, when you get home, everything that you've experienced, you actually relive it multiple times to try to put it in a place that it belongs so that you can go on. My biggest fear was not, and this is going to be strange for some people to hear, but when I flew over in a C-5A Galaxy, which has 5 decks, second largest aircraft in the world. Bottom deck alone can hold 8 Greyhound buses side by side, right? And when people say a prayer going into combat, the prayer's not, let me be a hero or let me live. It's actually, please don't let me be a coward. Let me do my job. Let me, stand up on my feet and to help protect my brothers and sisters, And when you come home, I think the prayer changes to, don't let me be stuck in 1991, right? And my fear for some of the people that go over that are very young, and I talk to veterans today all over the place, and it's difficult to see somebody who's stuck in 1967 or 1991 and they can't seem to get out of, right, that situation. And I think that's the difficult part. The experiences that you have are lifelong, and the scar tissue can be very deep, given what you've experienced over that.
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point too. I think that a lot of people have difficulties with, they ask people, why did you go in the military,
Right.
and what keeps you there? And I know when I went in the military, what I went in the military for was not what kept me there.
Right.
And you mentioned the camaraderie and
Sure.
the people. Another important thing that you mentioned, I think that people that are in the military have a difficulty with conflicts is they're the enemy.
Right.
These are people just like you and me,
Sure.
but they're the enemy. I'm not supposed to like these people.
Right.
And even to some extent, I might have to kill one of these
Absolutely.
people. And that's very, very difficult. I
Right.
think there's very few people, but there are some that go in there that just want to shoot people
Sure.
up and whatever.
Right, I've met them.
A lot of Marines, we
Yeah.
call them Marines. No, I shouldn't say that. That's a joke. That's a military joke.
Yeah.
But that's what we used to say, and we would be
Sure.
happy that there are people that are like that because we needed people in the military like
Right.
that. But those folks in particular, that if they were like you and me, never wanted to do that. So people, always ask, did you ever have to kill somebody? You never want to have
Right.
to do that. But I think, and you realize this also, you do it because of, and you mentioned, the person to the left of you
Sure.
and the person to the right of you.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you get into the situation, you have to, it's not a thinking game either, as you know, right? It's a reactionary game, and we're very well trained. Something, clicks off, I don't really have to give it a lot of thought, right? And even as a squad leader, if it was an ambush or we were reacting to something, I would order something to happen, with my crew, but they were already in that moment, right? They were already reacting to it anyway, right? The difficult part of being a veteran for me is reconciling. You go overseas, and if you have to take a life, you may actually receive a medal for that. Yeah. And then you come home back to civilian life, and somebody breaks into your house, and God forbid you even take out your firearm, right? So the rules change significantly. The game is very, very different, and people that are educated or somewhat cultured, when you get into that, and if you think too much, it could be the worst thing that you ever did, right? Because it's difficult.
yeah. I know even the small things that I've had to do, like staying awake for 24 hours
Sure.
and underground,
Yeah.
just to do an exercise.
Right.
I just would think,
Yeah.
my goodness, this
Right.
is, and after the fact, you sort of think about the things that you did.
Yeah.
You're right.
Right.
And they always come back in your mind, and that's very, very difficult. What is if there is one time, and I ask people, this is a very difficult question I ask, the thing that stands out in your mind the most, could be good, could be bad,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, the one thing that you maybe have a little bit of difficulty reconciling.
Yeah,
no
well,
matter
I
how
was,
much.
I can't be any more transparent than this. I was diagnosed with PTSD when I came home. The irony of that is some of that was actually born of a vehicle accident. I actually flipped a Humvee end over end, like a top, and we were left really out in the desert for about 2 hours as the sun was coming down. So the Republican Guard were out hunting. The antenna was buried, right? So the thing crushed, I crushed the roof on it, and it was myself and my platoon sergeant. So it was very, very difficult. Here's the story that I love to tell. Probably the darkest hour of my life became something that inspired me, right? So I always wanted to be a published author. I wanted to be a writer. My grandfather was an amazing storyteller, but never put pen to paper. I knew that this is a difficult business, 97% rejection rate, this and that. But I remember standing in the desert and I'm thinking, not if, but when I get home, I'm going to chase this down. Right? Life's too short. It was that. But and I don't even say that as a cliche. This was real. Like this was almost in my DNA where it was like, you know, at 23 years old, I feel like I'm about 53 years old. Yeah. And I don't want to do this the rest of my life. And I take great, great pride in having served. I do. And I love this country. I consider myself a patriot. There are other ways to serve, right? There are, you know, I put my time in. Again, I look back on it. I think, thank God I did it because it changed my life. But I had to go through, you know, a certain amount of hardship to have the courage to say, you know, even if I fail at this, right, being a writer, then I need to take that shot. I do. Life's too short, right? So.
No, I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I tell that to a lot of veterans too, and people that are retired, and said, "Listen, there's so many things in this world you can do.
Sure.
Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep doing it." You did mention that you're a writer, and I want you to talk a little bit about this. I have one of your
The
books
Unexpected
right here.
Storm. Yep.
Everybody, take a look at that. Tell us a little bit about your writing.
That was the first one. So, the first book I ever wrote, I wrote under a pen name, and I thank God for that because. I didn't know how to write at the time, right? So I wrote about the prison system and kind of walking through a medium security facility through the eyes of a correctional officer. Very difficult profession. I wanted to bring respect and recognition to it, the same way that, you know, the police are always heralded, and they should be, right? But people that work behind the wall, it's just that sub-society. So first book I wrote, this is actually the second book, and I want to say that probably the first good book that I wrote, if I'm being honest. But it wasn't, no, fiction, right? I was telling a story, but I didn't want it to be just my story, right? I served with 700,000 men and women in the Gulf at that time, and I wanted it to be pretty much everybody's story. And I didn't want it to be a John Wayne story. I wanted to explain what it feels like to actually say goodbye to your family and go to war, what it's like to go to war, and then finally coming home, which to me was the most difficult. You know, I remember walking on a red carpet. We came off the plane, and you could hear the buzz, right, from within the building, and it actually rocked me. I even feel emotional thinking about it now. But you know, one of my family members approached me and said, "Thank God it's over," and it was probably the scariest thing anybody's ever told me, because it was over for them, but it was really, there was so much more to go for me, right? To really return back to that person who was, you know what I mean, felt free, right? So, I mean, you just feel burdened with everything that you've been through. And again, it's not a complaint, or I'm not sure I would have done it any differently, but there's a price to pay.
Definitely.
A significant price to pay, and the loss of sleep, and, you know, relationships that are lost. I mean, it's, you know, you have to go through this process, which is very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think part of, you know, I was a hospital administrator, and I was a commander, and, you know, to hear the stories, to see what was happening to some of my troops that were deployed, I sent them there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so.
So you feel a certain burden. Right?
Yes.
I get it.
Yes, and to, you know, and the interesting things that would happen, and some of them coming home, and you know what was going on while they were gone.
Right.
Very, very disturbing, and, you know, you couldn't tell them, and all you could do was just get your team and say, when this guy gets back or this gal gets back, we're all, you know, gonna cuddle around them and sing Kumbaya and make sure they're okay.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And that is the trick too, right? And even when I wrote the book, I mean, the people ask about, you know, what's the book about? The book, really the message in the book is that we're not alone, ever. And it's difficult as a soldier, a sailor, airman, Marine, whatever, you know, you served in, when you start to go through that hardship. So you know, we trained together, we went over, we served together, we came home. And I'd say for really the first 5 years coming home, nobody wanted to see each other because it reminded you of incidents that you don't want to relive, right? So fortunately, we've since gotten past that. You know, I get together with these people all the time, and there's no handshakes. These, you know, they're hugs, right? These are brothers and sisters, and but born of hardship, right? And everybody, and it's weird. I mean, you go over there, and everybody has different experiences given whatever you were, you know, exposed to at that time, right? There were some people that went out on patrols, other people stayed back, and it was just, you know, and there was some horrifying things that went on, but it was just really luck of the draw as to who got to experience that, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm finding myself becoming a little emotional now.
Sure, right.
We talked about this before, about the shared experiences.
Right.
No matter what you've done, I mean, there's, you know.
Yeah, right.
You know, you don't have to be out there on the front line, you know. And it's like people say, civilians, we say civilians, they said, that they thank us for what we have done. And I think a lot of people find that difficult to
Right.
accept that thank. And I always say,
yeah.
I thank you
Right.
because you're the ones that have had to stay
Yeah.
back. You're the ones that have had to hear all these stories, see all these things on the
Right.
news, and so forth. But yeah, it's definitely a.
I do a lot of
definitely
work
a
with
experience.
with kids, and it's really born of my writing. And when I can work with veterans, I do. There's a lot of veterans that are aspiring writers, so I help whoever I can. But when I talk to kids, and my wife's an elementary school principal, so I'll go in every Veterans Day and we'll talk about it. And what I wouldn't tell kids is Veterans Day is almost laughable to me in that when you talk to any veteran, every day is Veterans Day, right? Like it's, you live with it all the time. But for somebody to say thank you or to acknowledge or have that respect is more than enough, right? So when I talk to kids and I say, listen, people are, serving overseas, a simple letter to say, thank you for what you're doing, or we're thinking about you, or the Red Sox are losing, or whatever it is, right? Just to connect you with home means more than you can ever imagine, right? So,
Girl Scout cookies.
yeah, exactly.
Send Girl Scout
M&Ms
cookies.
take forever to melt. It's fantastic.
I know my son was deployed, and he, they helicopter you in. I mean, that was to me, you cannot, they couldn't even, it was so unsafe, they couldn't drive him in.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, I asked him, that he has Facebook while he's there,
Right.
which is not so good because
Right.
all I kept on thinking the whole time
Yeah.
was there's going to be a time where he just says, I got to go.
Yeah.
And then I'd be panicking for the rest
Right.
of the time,
Right.
knowing what's going on.
It's tough.
You
right.
know, and
tough
then
for the families
yeah,
too. Right.
It is. And then going around his room and he's saying, "Oh no, I'm fine," and he kind of showing me all his, guns that he
Yeah.
has, and I'm like, "That's not helping me
Right. Right.
feel any better."
Right.
So it's very, very interesting, and I think with the social media and things that you see,
Yeah.
very interesting because I think I'm not sure if it helps. I just don't think it.
Yeah,
it
I mean,
helps.
for us, it was the one phone call every couple of weeks. You'd have to drive 3 hours, right? Stand in line for an hour, drive 3 hours back. But I think I prefer that. And I remember writing some letters, and I'd write, I'm a writer, right? So I'd write 6, 7 letters at a time, and it was always that generic, "Hey, I'm doing fine, getting a great tan," that type of thing. They had no idea where I was or what I was doing, and I didn't want my mom and my wife to worry. But in the same respect, you can't, the family that I have now is here. In order for me to survive and make it home, I need to concentrate and focus on this. And I remember talking to some of the people in my squad, and they'd talk about things from home, and I'm like, that's fine, but you cannot control any of that. Like this, you need to control this. You need to, focus on this. And that's the tough part, is separating from, from your family. And when I say separating, as you know, it's not just physically, it's also mentally. It's like I need to block that out, and I need to concentrate on what I'm doing now.
I mean, as a commander, I remember things like having to deal with where one of our troops would call back and say, "Would somebody please go over and check my wife's washing machine? She keeps calling me about the washing
Isn't that
machine." And we're like, and
Yeah.
I remember as a commander, I'd be like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, right.
And I'd have to send the first sergeant or whatever. I'm like, "You
Right.
need to get over there and take care of and make sure
Yeah.
this stuff doesn't
Yeah.
happen," because it's that kind of thing, and it's not their fault. It's not the
Right,
wife's
right,
fault.
right.
It's not. I mean, it's just a difficult situation.
I think in some respects, my mom probably suffered more than I did, right? So I knew where I was. And I'm not saying there aren't scary situations where you get, overloaded with adrenaline, but I reacted to it. I handled it, right? It was my job to take care of it, take great pride in the fact that I did my job well. But my mother, my father, my family didn't know where I was, whether I was safe, not safe. So a little bit of torment. And I think about my kids now and what it would be like to be in that situation. I'd rather go than send them, right? So, not that I want to go again. I'll be
No,
clear
no,
about that. But you know what I mean? Like
No, I do.
it's difficult to sit back on the sidelines and watch that and think, oh my God, like who knows, right? Who knows what can happen.
I made my son every time he hit. I told him, as soon as you get to the Air Force, I want to know because
Yeah.
I know you're taking care of
Yeah, right.
the Air Force.
Yeah, true.
So
Very
that
good
was
point.
good because that's the airplanes are there and that they're most highly protected.
Yes,
is where
they
the
are.
airplanes are.
Absolutely.
So I asked this question to everybody because I think the important thing that we're trying to do here is to try to do the best that we can to make people that don't know this experience to understand.
Sure.
If you could tell folks
Yeah.
one thing about veterans or how you would like them to see a veteran,
Right.
what would that would be?
Probably the best way I can put this in layman terms is that veteran, regardless of the experience or the branch in which they served. And people will always try to well, the Marines did this, the Army did that, Navy. Like for me, if you served, you served, right? So you took a risk of coming home under a flag, right? Which even that, walking up into the belly of that beast, right? I was very cognizant of the fact that I may not come home alive, right? So what I say to people is that all veterans, regardless of where they served or how they served, carry weight, right? There's a burden that they continue to carry, and I think probably till they draw their last breath. Just understanding that. I think all people have problems. We're all carrying that anchor, right? But for veterans, there is a weight that's being carried, right? So it's about respect. It's about showing respect for that. I'm not saying, you know what I mean, that you need to do X, Y, or Z, but just have that understanding that if somebody did serve, then they're carrying, right, whether it's mentally or in here, they're carrying that weight. And I think that by understanding that, you know what I mean, you're able to give a little more respect or gratitude. And like, I feel uncomfortable when people come up and say, you know, I want to thank you for your service. I do the same thing. Thank you. But deep down, I appreciate what they're saying, right?
Sure.
Because they're acknowledging that, you know, we went and did something that was, you know, super dangerous and really, I believe, for the right reasons. So.
And I appreciate that's a great thing to tell, because I really do feel that the majority of people that do come up and say thank you and teaching their children to do that.
It's a respect thing.
They are telling them why they're saying that to the veteran. And so I think we're very appreciative of that. Thank you to everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want you to take some time and tell folks a little bit about your books and your writing.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
so
please.
I've been at it for almost 25 years, so I kept the promise to myself. And actually, I got home. It took me about a year to really get started, but once I got kicked open, I've written 17 books. I have 4 #1 bestsellers on either Amazon or Barnes & Noble. I won the Los Angeles Book Festival in 2018. I won New York in 2019. I don't say that to brag. This is a very, very difficult profession, and I take great pride in the fact that I've had the perseverance to sit at that table and continue to work hard with it, right? So I teach my kids, we don't get what we wish for, right? We get what we work for. Starts as a wish, but you got to really work hard. I'm still working hard. I think, you know, after even 4 bestsellers, I'm just starting to get to a place where I have that platform and I can write what I want to write and, connect with my readership. So I'm on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter. Love to work with kids, any aspiring writers. I love, I'm a dreamer, right? So I love to work with dreamers, and it's not easy. I mean, it's not. I mean, the rejection rate within the profession from start to finish is 97%. So it's very, very difficult. And I think the industry's changed today in that, Amazon's taken over the world. So even the way books are sold or how they're marketed is very, very different. So, I'm middle-aged. Even at my age, I have to continue to learn and change and improvise, and which the military taught me. So I feel blessed for that I'm able to keep up with current current times. But my website's stephenmanchester.com. Feel free to go out there if you want to connect with me. I'll be glad to write you back. Book clubs. I'm very, very active in the community. I try to be as active as possible. I talk to, again, a lot of kids. I go into the schools. I volunteered for about 5 or 6 years with the Department of Youth Services, talking about reasons or giving them the reasons why they shouldn't go the next step into adult incarceration. And then that led into some literary stuff. We've done books on autism. So it's really important, every time I feel some success that I share that, because I'm a big believer in karma, right? And, when I flipped that Humvee, I don't really understand why I didn't die, to be honest with you. I mean, I got thrown out of the vehicle, the driver's side got crushed. And when I looked at it after, I'm like, it was like somebody plucked me out, right? So, not to get into faith, but, I look at that from a faith perspective, and there are reasons that I'm here, and I'm going to do what I can to help, until I get done with it.
Well, I want to thank you for your courage to serve your country.
Thank you.
And also the courage to get out there. And I think it's just a great story all the way around.
Thanks.
It takes courage, takes bravery, and even to do the things that civilians do, like write books and things like that. So thank you very much for being here.
I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Same.